Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. I'm just jonesing for the return of playoff football to Baltimore.
Yeah, only 3 days away now. It being Wednesday, we're recording on, and Saturday, of course, the game. Let's jump right in because we thought the topic for this show would be looking back at this quality first round of wild card games. Well, this round of wild card games we had in the first weekend of the playoffs, and talk about each of them individually and just some takeaways from those. I know Houston had a big win for starters over the Browns. It's still not the sort of thing that immediately concerns me for multiple reasons. But what was your take on the game?
Yeah, just watching those two teams play each other. I mean, one thing that happened that I absolutely was, predicting would happen would be that Joe Flacco would be pretty generous with the football. Mm-hmm. And he was to the tune of 2 pick sixes almost back to back. But aside from that, it just struck me that that Houston really matched up well against the Browns, against what the Browns would be trying to do. Like you and I asked, jokingly last week, like, show me the person who's actually well equipped to, deal with a Myles Garrett or a Highsmith. And turns out that person's Laramie Tunsil. And unlike the Ravens, who win at the line by having 4 guys who can win their one-on-one matchups at any given moment, but perhaps none are as dominating as a Garrett. The Browns really lean heavily on Garrett. So with him being largely neutralized and the Browns really not having much in the way of the secondary, I think also due in part to injuries, they really played very well into what Houston was trying to accomplish offensively.
Yeah, there's a Know Your Foe episode out there, by the way, so I'm not going to step on too much of what Rivers McCown said and some of our interactions in terms of what's really working and what's not for Houston right now. One of the things that really is very striking is Houston has a better pass blocking line than a run blocking line, and they did a good job against Garrett in this game. Garrett is working through that shoulder injury. He hasn't really been the same down the stretch here these last 4 or 5 games. So it's I don't think we look at that and say the Houston edge or the Houston line in general in particular is going to be able to deal with the Ravens. I think, in fact, the Ravens have big advantages on the defensive line versus the offensive line, particularly on the interior, where they have a bunch of small guys and some rookies. Juice Scruggs is a rookie at left guard. Their center is Dieter, who's a unusual 6'6" center. And he weighs over 300 pounds, but still that's his weight is not normally proportioned. And you're talking about a couple guys on the interior, Travis Jones and Michael Pierce, who can certifiably get good leverage and bully some people. And I hope they'll use some of that 1-3 match this week. We've been talking about it for a lot of the season. It's only happened a little bit that they've really used those guys 1 and 3 at the same time. But I think it'd be a really good way to stop the Houston run is to have the 2 of them in there at the same time as part of a 6-man box.
Yeah, I kind of look at the Ravens defensive line sort of the philosophy sort of similar to what we've accomplished with the receiving core, is that it's sort of a numbers game. The ceiling for either may not be as high as some of the other teams in the league, but the floor is a lot higher. And so, when you have that many competent guys playing, somebody's going to get that first pressure. You're going to get that cleanup pressure. I just think the Ravens, I was assuaged more than concerned at the end of that game that the Ravens defense is going to present a much better matchup to what Houston is putting out there. And that was my major takeaway. How about yours?
Yeah, I think I agree. First of all, I think the Houston offensive line, enormous weakness. And I didn't see that they didn't allow a bunch of sacks in this game, but they did allow some pressures early on where interior linemen were pushing either Dieter or Scruggs right back into the quarterback. And that's not, that's just, it's not a good thing. Stroud dealt with it in this game, and maybe he will against the Ravens as well. I think one of the things you add that could make it very difficult for both quarterbacks, but certainly for Stroud as well, and they depend on his accuracy more than the Ravens even depend on Lamar Jackson, which is that's really saying something. Is I think if it's a windy game, that probably benefits the Ravens net. It will hurt Tucker. It will hurt Jackson in terms of advantages we have in both of those areas. But on the other hand, I think the Ravens defense will really benefit from it, and they can potentially swarm to the football and be very effective.
And I think you try to consistently pass deep against the Ravens at your own peril.
Yes.
I'm not even saying that that's something that the Texans are going to be trying, much the way that they did in this game, but to do it as much as they did would be, I think, perhaps disastrous.
Not sure if I've mentioned this before on this show, but I had this. I put this together for the radio the other day, and I wanted to make sure I got this on a podcast. The last 5 games the Ravens have played when they've had their regular personnel out there, so we're discounting the Pittsburgh game. They faced 5 of the top 15 quarterbacks in the game: Herbert, Stafford, Lawrence, Purdy, and Tua. Okay. On throws of 15 plus yards in those last 5 weeks combined, the opponents are 16 out of 48 for 423 yards. By the way, those numbers are all fairly normal. You'd expect a lower completion percentage when you throw deep, but with 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions and a 47.5 quarterback rating. The Ravens, you throw deep at your own peril. That's exactly the correct words to use for how the Ravens attempt to set up versus any good quarterback. They take away the deep pass first, and then they figure out how they're going to make him very uncomfortable throwing other passes as well, whether that's via pressure, rotation of safeties, or whatnot. But they show that too high look most of the time to start with, and it's been very effective this year.
For sure. Yeah. All that said, you can only play who's in front of you, and Houston took care of business pretty handily, even without Flacco's assistance. And they should be very proud of what they accomplished, and the future looks bright there, and they're going to be a tough opponent next week.
Yeah, I would have probably started with that, is that, this is not a gimme game. The Ravens are going to have to come in here very highly focused. They're going to have to not have some of the things that happened in 2019 happen, where high leverage plays start to go against them early, and they get behind that way, and they effectively lose their chance to come back in the game because of something like that. It's not impossible for a game like this to get away early, but on the other hand, I think that they match up very well with the Texans. It's the game is either 9 or 9.5, depending on where you look right now. High 70s probability of the Ravens winning the game seems about right to me based on the money line. So anyway, it's certainly a game. You always face somebody tough in the playoffs. I think this is a very reasonable divisional opponent for the Ravens.
Totally. And I think a good analog for like the game flow is sort of how the game against Miami started. Miami marched right down the field and they scored, and then the Ravens knew that they needed to keep pace. They did. And then at that point, the defense kind of got settled into the game. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's sort of how this game opened up.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a shocker at all. I mean, it's if the Ravens can do what they have done to a lot of good teams lately and just progressively outscore them and create this boiling frog of progressive despair in their opponents. So it's interesting. The 2000 Ravens, they did it also. They would find cheap ways to score. So just the points were 3 times as valuable, it seemed like, in those years, because the Ravens defense didn't allow anything at all. But it was just boiling a frog, progressive despair. You're up 3-0. You're up 10-0. Well, 10-0's, like Mick Ditka said during the Super Bowl, is like 21-0 for any other team. And yeah, I love teams that can impose that kind of progressive despair anyway. Let's move on. Let's talk about that Kansas City-Miami game. Freezing conditions in Kansas City. Just some of the worst misery for football you've ever seen. Andy Reid's mustache, about the grossest thing I've ever seen. In terms of, it's gross to start with. It's just completely overgrown, but then fill it with all that, residue from his breath and whatnot. It's pretty foul.
Yeah, no, it was that is an image I think that's gonna stick, you know, stick in my head for a long time. I actually found this game. This game was a little bit more interesting than the score would have suggested. It seemed at times that it seemed at times that Miami was going to be able to get back into this. There came a point in the middle of the game where Miami was suddenly forcing field goals. Unfortunately, they just were never able to really take advantage of that by forcing, by kind of going for broke and getting some of those chunk plays that they've really been reliant on. And I think earlier in the season, maybe when they were a little bit healthier, they were able to kind of hit those with more consistency. I mean, Tyreek Hill had a lot of key drops in this game. I mean, it's probably like 2 or 3, but it seemed like a lot more, maybe just because they were at such important moments, and they never were able to offensively do what they needed to do. The defense actually, I felt, acquitted itself pretty nicely considering the extent of the injuries they had, but they just didn't have the firepower to get it done.
Yeah, one thing that was impressive about Miami, and you just kind of hit on it here, is they really held Kansas City down in the red zone, and they ended up with 4 field goals. I think they were all pretty much shorties. I think the longest one was in the 30s. In terms of, he might have had one of 40 exactly in the game. But anyway, it was a game of very short field goals and tough kicking conditions. Obviously, if I had to pick, one plus and one negative, well, I'll do more than that. The Kansas City on offense, I thought Rashee Rice looked great. He looks like a legitimate threat for Mahomes. And if I'm saying where they were before the game, where they were after the game, and the thing that is a lot better is Rashee Rice looks like a real weapon, and Mahomes really needs one. So that's good. If I'm going the other direction, I'd say Kelsey didn't look very good. He had a bad game dropping the ball, but unfortunately, I don't think that's something we can count on going forward.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But it does. He just doesn't look right, and hasn't really all year. I mean, he started off with an injury. One wonders whether he ever fully recovered or whether it's just age catching up to him. Who knows what he'll look like next year if he chooses to play next year. But yeah, he just doesn't look quite as explosive as he normally does. There was a lot of frustration that he was sort of not hiding at all. And so some of the sort of like season-long frustration that the Chiefs have been really consistently putting on display seem to be there. Ultimately, I think the Chiefs defense did a competent job. I don't think the offense was anything special. So sort of more of the same from the Chiefs. And I think that they were able to, stay focused, stay calm, keep doing their thing because they are a team that's been there before. And they weren't going to get, they weren't going to go crazy or out of control or anything like that in this playoff situation. And I think they did what they needed to do, but it wasn't anything special.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same place. On defense, they did look good. Chris Jones was in the backfield a fair amount during the day, and they definitely got a good pressure on Tua that forced him into some very uncomfortable throws. Tua looked terrible in the weather. I think that it's not just a matter of weather with Miami. They really have not beaten anybody, and their signature win is a 22-20 home win over Dallas. And Dallas just showed up as the fraud they are in this first round of the playoffs. So I just, with a lot of other teams, this is an interesting thing. With Lamar Jackson, it's like he'll never get them. He'll never play quarterback, and then he'll never get them into the playoffs as a quarterback. And then he did in 2018. And he'll never win in the playoffs because look, he couldn't handle the changes that San Diego made. Now there's a blueprint to beat him. And then he wins the MVP award, and still get that playoff thing because he's never going to win anyway. There's this progressive movement of the goalposts or raising the crossbar. With Miami, it's never been necessary. You can't get past the first level. So, they did win the AFC East. No, they didn't. Buffalo
They didn't.
Yeah, so except for that, they're fine.
Last time they won the AFC East, we escorted them out
2001.
expeditiously in 2008.
Oh, no, wait, 2008. You're right.
Yeah.
So their last playoff win was the game before they were shut out by Oakland, the game before Oakland was destroyed by the Ravens in 2000. So that's just how long ago that was. So, I don't know that I really have a lot other to say about that Kansas City game. We did see something that I don't think the Ravens will do, and that is Miami used 18 cover zero looks during the game, and they used 40 against the Ravens in that Thursday night misery, where Jackson could not figure it out, and Roman also could not get it figured out. This is something you keep doing for a while. Mahomes is a worse quarterback to do it to, because he's one of the best hot readers of any quarterback in the league. You put pressure in his face, he generally knows exactly what to do with it in terms of where to go with the football. It didn't seem like a great plan to me, but Miami might have been just out of options because they're so banged up. We saw Justin Houston in there, and there's been various talk about bringing back Justin Houston after his year. I guess he spent it with the Panthers in football purgatory. But they've been talking about bringing him back, but he was among their better players in this game on defense, and that's not saying much, frankly, at this time of year.
No, not really. And I think the I think the one last thing is there was some really frustrating situations. I think if you're a Dolphins fan, where they kind of got cute on like 3rd and short with some with some trick plays and things like that, or pitches out behind the line of scrimmage, sort of recalling our earlier frustrations with Zay Flowers. It just really blew up in their face. So cautionary tale for the Ravens: don't get cute, pick up the first down, and get cute on first or second down.
Deshaun Elliott had I don't know if you saw the picture out there on Twitter. It's one of the greatest pictures I've ever seen of the piece of helmet flying off Mahomes as it's cracked and whatnot. Mahomes has got this big wincing thing about him. You can see Elliott, the back of his jersey and whatnot. If Deshaun Elliott doesn't blow that up and put it in his front hall, I'd be surprised. I think it's the kind of thing that really makes sense. So good for him for making a big play like that. And I can't believe that they allowed the game to continue with Mahomes on the field. Like, he should have to immediately leave the field with a broken helmet like that, and taking a hit like that. The officials should have been all over him, checking him for concussion anyway and getting him off the field. But they just don't. They don't impose a even-handed standard with regard to that, and I'm very frustrated by that. It's not dissimilar to the roughing the passer problems.
And also, and I think that'll come up a little bit in the in the Bills game when we get to that. But you saw Stafford took an enormous hit, and just eyes rolled to the back of his head, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, he's fine. Curious as to how that works. But
yeah, I think there'll be some post game concussion realizations out of some of these players, which is, it's just really bad. A few years ago, 2014, Roethlisberger came back into the game after he'd been removed for a concussion, and he just did it on his own thing. It's like nobody can stop him all of a sudden. Well, blow the whistle, get him the hell out of the game. The Ravens were probably actually happy that it was.
He threw a pick, I think.
He threw a pick after that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's roll on to that Buffalo game. What was interesting, and this is really the poster child game for me for wanting to have the bye week. Buffalo, very physical game against Pittsburgh. I think you mentioned earlier that you're happy the Ravens are not going to be facing Pittsburgh, and we may all have our own reasons for this, but what are yours?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've mixed emotions. I just think the Ravens are going to play a cleaner game against Houston than they are against the Steelers. I think the Steelers' entire MO is we have a talent deficit, particularly on offense. So we're just going to try to gum up the works as best as we can and just kind of get you out of the rhythm of what you're trying to do rather than really accomplish anything of note themselves. And that is sort of where you can kind of get into a situation where all of a sudden the game's on the line, it's a low scoring game, and and you're just trying to win it in the last seconds of regulation. I think the Texans are kind of a team that the Ravens are going to come in and they're going to do what they want to do, and they're going to execute against a challenging opponent, much like they have all season. And I don't really want to see a divisional opponent. I think is what it is.
High stakes if they play the Steelers for certain in terms of bragging rights, in terms of the crap we'll have to listen to. Lose a game to the Texans, it'll be bad because it'll be a knock on Lamar that'll be really hard for him to shake after his second MVP season that he still can't win a playoff game kind of thing. But it would be a lot worse if it was in the division. You lose 3 to the Steelers in one game, 1 year, even though one of them they should have won, the other one they weren't trying. There's asterisks on these games, but still, they lose a playoff game that would not have an asterisk, and it would be a really awful loss. I think I kind of personally, I like the combination of Tomlin having the consecutive winning year streak and Tomlin having the consecutive years of not winning a playoff game streak going at the same time.
Yeah, I mean they are really in football purgatory. I'd be very frustrated if I were a Steelers fan. I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest problem is they don't have a quarterback, and they don't have any realistic prospects for getting a quarterback. So, if they need to, trade up and trade some first round picks to do it, I mean they got to do it because they, there's or see what Kirk Cousins is doing next year because they really don't have much to go on.
Yeah, it's interesting prospect in terms of that because they really don't have the money to do that either. So it would be they'd really be betting the whole franchise on Kirk Cousins if they brought him in.
Coming off injury at an advanced age.
Yes. So lots of problems that would go with that. But let's get back to the Buffalo side because I think that's more interesting. And Buffalo, the Ravens have to look forward to Buffalo as a potential opponent. I mean, I can't think Kansas City also is a potential opponent, obviously. But Buffalo really badly outmatched Pittsburgh. But at the same time, they had some significant injuries accrue during the game. And Christian Benford going down is a huge loss for them, just an enormous loss for them in the secondary area that's already short Rasul Douglas. They already short Tre'Davious White, if you want to go way back. But it's interesting that Kaiir Elam, who's incredibly maligned in Buffalo, he's had 2 terrible years. After being a number 1 draft pick at number 23, comes up with a big pick for them that effectively won the ball game.
Yeah, it like you said, it was a very tough, very physical game. The Steelers' complete inability to get anything going in the passing game. I mean, the passing was so errant that it honestly reminded me of watching the Bowler days. Just a wild pass after wild pass, and then all of a sudden there's like one deep completion out of like the last 5, that kind of gets a drive going until it stalls out on the next set of downs. That really played into what the Bills were trying to do. They keyed in on the run, on stopping the run, and so the sort of offensive impotence from the Steelers really did them in, as one could predict.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. I don't think they quite had the stadium dug out there by game time. And, we saw all the stuff before. The field looked great. And then you give the fans these seats that all have 12 inches of snow on them. And what are they supposed to do with that? The only other option really was to play the game somewhere else, which would have meant a whole ticket redistribution mess and whatnot. To go, play the game in Detroit, say, or play the game somewhere where there's a dome, Indianapolis, maybe. Actually, Detroit wouldn't have worked because they had their own game, but Indianapolis could have worked, I guess. But then, in order to move that game, it just would have been a nightmare. I understand that, and yet trying to play it there and having everybody sit in their snow-covered seats also did not really seem ideal to me in terms of the fan experience.
Well, I heard various reports anywhere between 30 and 60 people were digging out the stadium, volunteers. And, I haven't looked at the Bills' financials personally, but it seems to me that they might be able to afford to hire a large number of people to
They did. They put it right out on Twitter. They offered $20 an hour for people to come to Highmark, and then they were subject to the travel ban initially, so they couldn't show up. And so they were saying, "Well, we have to show up later." And then they were finally exempted from the travel ban by either the governor or the local county executive or whoever it would have been who would have been responsible for this. They were finally able to get shoveling. They didn't complete the job. I mean, so large portions were still undug out. My understanding is they told everybody sit wherever you want, but they couldn't have really done that because they'd have had a huge mess of drunken buffoonery if they'd actually done that. So I think that Buffalo people deal with this kind of thing all the time. Maybe it's not that big a deal for them to sit in some snow, but it didn't seem like the greatest fan experience. And I don't really fear Buffalo the way I probably did before the game because of the injuries. The Bernard injury is huge, even though he went off on a cart and then he had negative X-rays, which is very unusual. But I don't think he's going to be back anytime soon. He's got some sort of a sprain. I don't believe he'd be back for the AFC Championship game, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I guess what I would say about Buffalo is that they are a better running team than they've been in recent years. We should give them credit for that. So I think their offense is going to be a little more balanced than it's been. But again, I don't, provided that Hamilton is healthy, I think that they can kind of handle what they're going to do and kind of, maintain that too high look pretty well. I don't know. They've got some good tight ends. I don't know that Gabe Davis is striking fear in the hearts of anybody. And then that frees you up to double Diggs, who was prone to kind of getting frustrated. And so if you can kind of frustrate him early on in the game, he can be taken out a little bit, I think. But definitely not an opponent I would take lightly. But again, just sort of like what we said about the Chiefs, I don't know that they did anything that was particularly impressive or concerning that would make you fear. But one thing that Buffalo and specifically Josh Allen sort of continue to do, which is a little annoying, and people have been talking about, is sort of Josh Allen's sort of penchant for sliding at the last second.
Yep.
I don't know how you feel about it. I kind of think he did one of those fake slides on that 50+ yard touchdown run of his. I don't know what a defender's supposed to do about that, other than, if you're hitting him while he's sliding, go get your money's worth. Don't. And I mean, it was unbelievable. The slide where he slid at the very last second. In my opinion, he knew that the defender was committing.
Yep.
And he slid at the very last second for the purpose of drawing that call, which he got. And the defender did absolutely everything he could. I mean,
everything.
He let his arms up. He started turning. The contact was so minimal, and it just goes completely against the spirit of the rule. I think it's really inappropriate. I think it's a cheap penalty. And there have been a number of quarterbacks who have, I want to say that I think they actually called this right in the Chargers game, I think, where Herbert was looked like he was trying to gain the last yard or two that he could while going out. And so that when the defender hit him out of bounds, they actually didn't.
No flag.
Yeah, there was a no flag, but I really think that's going to be a coached up, trained up part of Josh Allen's game plan if and when the Ravens face him.
This is rules changes follow trends that are going in the league. And one of the problems with 2023 as a season is a lot of depressed offense and a lot of it based on injuries at quarterback. So I don't think this is going to be a year where they look at rule changes and they say, yeah, we got to make it easier for defenders to understand when they can hit a quarterback or not. So I just don't believe this is the year they'll do it. But at some point it'll come up again. And, one thing that'll come up again based on this Buffalo game is the possibility of how much the NFL doesn't want whether, I'm air quoting this, to impact playoff games and what this is going to mean in terms of having playoff games scheduled at neutral sites. And I think it'll start with the AFC Championship game, but just the notion of having 3 Super Bowls instead of 1 is very attractive to NFL owners in terms of being able to plan for that and have sponsorship for that they can drive additional dollars from.
Yeah, that would be a real shame. One of the best things one of the best benefits, aside from just getting to play at home, is just the fans getting the experience and the sort of the pride of hosting one of the championship games in your city. And if they don't want weather to impact games, then they should stop allowing teams to build stadiums that don't have retractable roofs. Yeah. And maybe there's some sort of clause or something where the NFL can sort of say, like, okay, the weather is going to be bad enough that we're not allowing the you have to close the roof and something like that, and that presents its own problems. But I think there's maybe a middle ground there.
Yep. All right, let's move over to the NFC. We're going to be briefer on these because they have less immediate impact on the Ravens. So 49ers, of course, off with a bye in this first week. We saw Philadelphia and Tampa on Monday night in a pretty lousy football game. It was about 27-7 at the half or whatever it was. It wasn't that bad. It was 16-9 at the half, wasn't it? I'm thinking of a different game. But it got out of hand in the second half pretty quickly. The Eagles team, what a awful finish for them this year to lose 6 of their last 7, I believe it was.
Yeah, I mean, they just, whether through injury or other things, they just completely, ran out of juice. And it's a disappointing finish to a team that had Super Bowl aspirations and sort of started out that way. But when the push isn't getting it done, that's when they're in trouble. But it was, I like to root for Baker Mayfield. I think he got a raw deal in Cleveland, and I think he has, sort of done, the journeyman thing a little bit, and maybe cemented a home for himself in Tampa Bay. It was good to see him succeed.
The point was made on the broadcast that Tampa did a really good job of finding the right priced quarterback who could still help them win, and Mayfield was that this year. And I assume he'll still be part of the plans in Tampa going forward, since this year went fairly well. But it's definitely remarkable, even in the NFC South, that you can have the kind of cap problems they had with Brady basically coming off the books and still put together a playoff run out of a year like this.
Helps to play in a lousy division, but they do have talent in some key areas on that roster. I don't see any reason for them to move on from Baker, particularly relative to the roster or the quarterback options that they could, reasonably, attain. But one of the interesting things from that broadcast, Ray Lewis was on the Manning cast for a period, and he was talking about something that I think really applies to what makes the Ravens defense so great. It was a long play. I don't even remember what the play was, but there was a long play with some very bad tackling. And of course, if there's one thing that's going to get Ray Lewis going, it's bad tackling. And so he sort of opined that one of the reasons why defense can be so bad in the NFL and why tackling can be so bad is that a lot of guys, he said, are playing individual defense. Mm-hmm. And I think what he means by that is, or as opposed to team defense, which means that players are taking angles based not just on without an understanding of what's going on around them and what everybody else's responsibility is. If you know what the guy to the left of you and the guy to the right of you are doing, and you understand their responsibilities and you trust them to fulfill those responsibilities, absent some information that would suggest that they cannot, like the guy fell down or whatever, you know, then that puts you in a much better situation to make the play or just cover the territory that you're supposed to cover. Maybe you don't make the play. Maybe you just need to maintain your particular lane so that when the receiver or the running back cuts back, if they decide to cut back, they're going to run into your waiting arms. And I think that's what really makes the Ravens defense so special, is that they are just phenomenal as far as their understanding of where every player in the defense is at any given time. And that's that's a real credit to the scheme and the players.
It's a real credit to both for sure. I mean, the Ravens for their entire history basically have been a team that played run defense very much that way, that they schemed to deny space on the inside of the line, make it easier for linebackers to flow to the football and make tackles, et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't, even in 2000, they didn't have a lot of tackles coming from their interior defensive linemen. But Siragusa had some ridiculously low number of tackles, but he was certifiably a great run defender in terms of maintaining his spot and forcing the lanes to be respected, and or actually bifurcating the field sometimes. So Sam Adams is the guy I think of as more doing that. But anyway, not to get too far away from this point, the Ravens, with the kind of zone looks they show on a lot of plays and the back to front nature of looking at the play, one of the great things about zone defense is everybody is watching the same movie. Okay, so you basically are headed towards the football in the same way, and you do have a better understanding of where your teammate is than you do in man coverage, which leads to better tackling. It leads to more second man to the ball opportunities and whatnot. And you give up some things in terms of separation to get that, but it still could be extremely valuable. So I think what the Ravens have done with it, the scheme has really proven to be good. And I think some of the mantra we heard earlier in the offseason about it's not just knowing what your job is, it's also about understanding how it fits into the scheme. We heard that from some players early on, not just from, say, McDonald or Harbaugh, where I would be more skeptical of the origin of the thing. I think that's actually come to fruition, and we've seen that on the field. So that's been one of the really big positives of having McDonald here.
No doubt about that. I think he's definitely unlocked something, and hopefully the results will remain consistent over what I'm hoping for will be the next 3 weeks.
Do you trust the post-McDonald Ravens to maintain that as an organizational philosophy that they don't lose track of? So Harbaugh stays, McDonald goes. That's the most likely event at some point over the next couple of years. So the Ravens go and they get Minter from Michigan, or that'd be actually a very similar one. They go out and they get another guy, because Minter, I think it would definitely be true. They go out and they get somebody else to be their new defensive coordinator. Maybe it's Anthony Weaver. Do you think that there's enough organizational buy-in to this that becomes part of the baseline of what we think of in terms of Ravens defense, that it's something that you can't uninstill from it?
Yeah. So I would say the thing the thing that supports the answer being yes more than anything else is sort of the shift in drafting philosophy. I think, I think that DaCosta has a big departure between DaCosta and Newsom was that Ozzie was still, really fixated on getting these like run stuffers, I think, up to a point where it had sort of become a little bit detrimental to the team a little bit. And so, I think if DaCosta is trying to really, focus on pass defense more than run defense, which I think you have to in the modern NFL, I would imagine that would be the one of the first questions in that interview for defensive coordinator. Now, of course, if a defensive coordinator interviewing for the job one time met Jack Harbaugh at a diner and they had lunch together or something like that, that may be, a reason to hire him. The Harbaughs do love to, their friends and buddies,
Connected people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's been to their detriment. But I think that this philosophy is played out in such a profoundly improved way, particularly in stark contrast to some of the glaring, failures at high leverage moments of like, Wink Martindale, who otherwise was, quite a good defensive coordinator, right? But I think they understand, they can see the difference, versus like a very, very disciplined sort of approach to team defense versus what prior defensive coordinators have done. I can't imagine them not trying to pursue that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about that Detroit game against the LA Rams. Nice storyline for the city of Detroit to get a home game after all these years, to get a win in the playoffs after quite a long time, keep their Super Bowl hopes alive. I gotta say, in just watching the game, the Rams have been one of the hotter teams in the NFL down the stretch. Only losing basically to the Ravens. They have one other loss during the down the stretch, but anyway, primarily their big loss was to the Ravens in that overtime game in Baltimore. From that perspective, they've been quite good. There's nothing all that darn impressive about either of those teams to me. Detroit does some things well in the passing game. They have a decent running game. I haven't really been particularly impressed with what they brought defensively to the table. It's just I don't see them as a real contender for the Super Bowl, but I guess we'll see. They're certainly one of the best 6 or 7 teams in the NFL right now. It's beating the Rams at home by 1, and what they did and how they did it in the game just was not that impressive to me.
Well, I do think that the rest of the NFL or the rest of the NFC is thrilled to have the Rams gone, because I think if there was a team that was going to give the Niners a run for their money, it was going to be the Rams, behind a very good running game, behind a very good passing game, particularly Matt Stafford, been there, done that, very experienced quarterback. I think the difference was, 2 things. Number one, the Rams didn't pick up the pass rush well at all. I didn't examine it. I just watched the game, live. So I didn't examine it close enough to see whether it was simply, winning one-on-one matchups, or whether Detroit was doing something, special in terms of disguises. But I think that was a big difference. And then also the Rams did the kind of a similar thing to what they did against Baltimore, is that they would abandon the run at just the strangest times. If you remember, I think it was the Rams' first drive against the Ravens. They ran the ball like 9 consecutive times.
Yep.
And basically ran it up into the red zone, and then went 3 and out passing. So they did, they did us a huge favor, I guess, in that moment. And so there were just situations, on short yardage situations where they just elected to pass. And maybe the idea was, they're expecting the run, so don't run, but I think that school of thought maybe is a little bit elementary, particularly when the run is working. So I think they kind of took themselves out of it on a few of their offensive drives. What did you think?
Well, okay. First of all, in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of the Rams, I agree that they're not always consistent in their plan there, and in the abandoning the run, it was particularly bad. I guess the game kind of got out of hand as Stafford started to take a few hits. But even if I look at what Detroit did in the game, Aiden Hutchinson got a lot of pressure. And I mean, the rest of the Detroit defense got very mediocre kind of amount of pressure in this game. And they're not a pressure machine based on what I saw in this game. The Rams had been pretty good about avoiding penalties. They've been a pretty decent pass blocking team for a lot of the year. They weren't great in this game at all. There was definitely some people. The pocket was getting compressed a little bit on Stafford, but honestly, there's really nothing on either side of this game that I thought this team is a Super Bowl contender.
Sure.
It's both of them are, seem to be somewhat limited teams. And in that, and honestly, even though this is very dangerous to say this the week before the Ravens play the Texans, but I kind of felt the same way about the Texans and Browns game. Is a similar game in terms of both teams just looked a little bit short in terms of what you need to be real competitive in the postseason.
I bet it was unbelievably loud also in that in Detroit, in the Dome. Detroit's hungry for a playoff win. You've got, Stafford coming back. So there's just a great recipe for just a deafening sort of game. And that could have been the difference for some of these drives. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you can't take the Texans lightly, but they did what they were supposed to do. And they took advantage of the opportunities that were there. I don't know that they did much more than that.
So let's talk about the Dallas game now. Dallas has become the Miami of the NFC at this point. It's been a long time since they've had any success in the playoffs. It's they are a team that were so astoundingly bad in this game against the Packers. And they scored 2 late touchdowns, which really close in the game, but they were down 48-16 in this game before they got 2 8-point scores to finish it off. Jordan Love looked like not Brett Favre, maybe Aaron Rodgers in this game in terms of being able to throw the ball wherever he wanted to. I think some of that's on the Cowboys defensively. Cowboys have a boomer bust kind of a pass scheme with Bland being the poster child for it, with a lot of interceptions and a lot of big plays allowed. I'm so unimpressed with that Cowboy team, and kind of I don't want to keep looking at it. I don't like what it means in terms of Schadenfreude for me, but to see Jerry Jones just go, ballistic during and after the game is just it's amusing to me, and he richly deserves it.
Oh, I completely agree. First of all, the hiring of Mike McCarthy to begin with was just shocking to me. And then, when the guy goes and admits that he lied in his interview about, studying the analytics, he shouldn't even get off the podium before being fired. He made Jerry Jones look like a bigger fool than Jerry usually looks like. And, it's what can you say? The Dallas just does not have the mental toughness, the ability to, execute in these key situations. And they haven't showed it all season. They just happen to have a schedule where they were able to beat up on a bunch of powder puff teams. And that really, gave them the opportunity to, host a game. And, I think it says much more positive about the Green Bay Packers sort of, coming into, a big lights, hostile crowd, and Jordan Love really just showing, that maybe the Packers have gone 3 for 3 back to back with their quarterbacks, which would be
incredible run.
Incredible. Yeah.
Now, to me, coming out of this game, as much as, I think a lot of people will latch onto the Detroit story and the fact that they're around. Detroit will play at home again, right? Because Dallas lost. They will play again at home. But I think the Green Bay Packers now come out of this game as very significant NFC contenders, if there is another one. I mean, the AFC, one of the things you look about the wagering and the odds on the Super Bowl right now, futures line has shifted way over to the 49ers. And it's not because they're a better team than the Ravens. It's because they've got an easier path to get there. And, the NFC, basically all of the, the good teams. We'll say Dallas lost, obviously, and the LA Rams, who, as you mentioned, a lot of people thought were going to make some noise in the NFC, got beat as well, and so that meant that the Eagles, who I think there's still some people out there who had not given up on, despite 5 out of 6 losses to end the regular season. Those teams all out of there. San Francisco is basically sitting at home, smoking a cigar on their couch, waiting for whoever they have to play the rest of this postseason. And it will be in San Francisco unless something goes immensely wrong. But the one team that looked better at coming out of this is the Packers. And maybe the Packers are one who can make noise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they it's everything seemed to go right, and it's a good for Jordan Love, who was under a lot of scrutiny, coming into this season, and criticized any time that he sort of made a mistake throughout the season. I think this is a sort of very, very promising chapter in his career. You have to feel good about the 49ers' chances, but the Packers can, if they play like they played against Dallas,
they've got a chance.
They've got a chance for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the team that's actually best suited to line up and try to beat the 49ers is the Ravens. But as we've, kind of seen earlier this year, but it could happen. I mean, it could, a super hot hand from a quarterback is always a possibility. And the 49ers really demonstrated their inability to come from behind against the Ravens. And part of that's the Ravens defense, of course. I'm not trying to minimize what they did with all those turnovers, but also when forced to throw instead of run with the kind of regularity they had at times, they were not as effective, to be sure. So anyway, anything else that we need to talk about from this wild card weekend, Slava, that comes to mind?
No, just that nothing. Like, I think the theme is nothing I saw last weekend really raises the concern level for me this weekend. Single elimination game is always sort of the high stakes nature of the playoffs, and that's nerve wracking, but that's part of what makes the playoffs great. And it's time for Lamar and this iteration of the Ravens to kind of rewrite sort of what the narrative has sort of been on them, and that starts with a win on Saturday.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really good, but I guess multiple points there. But the Ravens do need to take this opportunity to take care of business. There won't be another good one. The window is closing a little bit after this year with all of the free agents that are leaving. So this is it for this version of the Ravens. Potentially for this version of the coaching staff, this might be the last really good chance to win a Super Bowl, and the Ravens need to try and convert it. And it's no gimme. There are no absolutes in the playoffs. What do we hear in terms of absolutes this season, or just in the last 5 or 6 weeks? One is the Chiefs aren't going to lose again. There's no way the Ravens with 3 wins are going to take the number 1 seed in the AFC. Not only they got it by 2 games, by doing exactly that, basically. Then we heard absolutes about the Ravens are definitely playing the Browns. Well, the Browns didn't even win their game. Yes, the other 2 things did set up for them exactly right, which wasn't a sure thing because Miami was the most likely team for the Ravens to face. Actually, if you're looking at the money line, I have a lack of respect probably when I see opinions tossed out there that deal in absolutes with regard to playoff wins or losses. Ravens better not take this as an absolute that they've got this game won. I don't think they will. I think they have the proper leadership on the team in place right now, specifically with Roquan. And I think a lot of Lamar's experience, but also potentially bled over from what Roquan brings to this table, has made the Ravens, a much more steely-eyed closer of a team than they've ever been before.
And the balance on the team just sort of lets, if one phase of the game starts to get away, this Ravens team can really bear down, on the other side of the ball and sort of play really good complementary football. Something doesn't go right on, there have been moments where, a turnover on offense has set up a short field for the defense, and the defense has been resilient, mentally tough, and able to, keep it down to 3-point score, or get a quick 3 and out, depending on, the circumstance. So, the ability to kind of do that and sort of stay in the game and never get too far outside of what you're trying to do and get too derailed, I think really bodes well. And, you just want to, I think there is this idea that, as long as the Ravens have Lamar, they're going to be good and they're, whatever. And yeah, it's great having a quarterback situation figured out. That's fantastic. But you just have to look at the Eagles, right? The Eagles pretty much returned their entire roster and infused it with more talent in the offseason, and they fell apart. I mean, they got to the playoffs, but they limped into the playoffs and they fell apart. The Bengals were sort of expecting to contend, and injuries to Joe Burrow now put them in a situation where they need to re-sign, some key free agents, and they're probably not going to be able to keep all of them. So the window, it's not just Lamar's window; it's the team's window. So I think they're acutely aware of that, and I think that they're not going to take it for granted, especially after 2 seasons where Lamar wasn't able to finish healthy. I think he really appreciates being back. I mean, the last time he played a playoff game was the one where he got knocked out in Buffalo. So it's been a while, and it's time to take the next step.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see this happen. In terms of complimentary football, so many games this year fit the description you've just given. But if you think about what was going on in the Miami game, the defense had a lot of trouble stopping Miami on those first 2 drives. Miami scored a touchdown. The Ravens offense responded. Miami was in position to score another touchdown. Hill bobbled the ball out of the end zone, 10-7. And pretty much at that point, the Ravens took over that game like nobody can take over a football game and outscored them, 49-9 the rest of the way, I think, or whatever it was. So it's been great to see that complimentary football played, to see the teams, the frog get boiled in the way I mentioned earlier this game. But yeah. I agree with what you're saying about the Ravens. Really are in a good position. They can't take this opportunity for granted, and I don't think they will. Doesn't mean they'll win. I don't think they'll let this get away from them for some of the lack of focus reasons that I think people have pointed to, true or not, in the past.
Yeah. If any team out there is able to take the Ravens' best shot, so be it. But we want to see their best shot.
All right. Well, Slava, always a pleasure to talk football with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVA KUPERSTEIN.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there who want to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. In particular, now I'm trying to get together some ideas for the off season. So we'll probably be recording after the Super Bowl. By the way, if you've got something that's specifically related to the Super Bowl or Super Bowl prep or whatever, there will be time for shows that week as well during that off week. So hit me up. I'll promise to get back to you very quickly with a response for your idea, or try to boil it down to something I think would make a good episode, and hopefully we can record very quickly. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.